Section 9 of the Daredevil of the Army. Experiences as a buzzer and dispatch rider, by Austin Patrick Corcoran. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 5, in which the author repairs the airline and retires for repairs himself. Part 1. Dumar being chosen as the most suitable health resort for the restoration of my shaken nervous system, I was dispatched there presently with a commission that called for the least possible effort on my part. Here, 16 miles back of the line, I was out of range and out of hearing of the guns, and my billet, the cure's home, gave an added touch of peace to what was already a most peaceful setting. It was a poor home, for Catholic clergymen are not rich in French worldly goods, but the housekeeper, acting on instructions from her very hospitable master, did more than her best to make me happy. Incidentally, she was Irish. How she got there I never learned, for I lacked the courage to inquire, though I confess to some curiosity on the subject. But the tea and toast she brought Lacey, my billet mate, and myself in the mornings had all the flavour of home. I never tasted the rest of her cooking, for, of course, we ate at the mess. Lacey, a Canadian lieutenant in charge of the airline section, was my immediate superior for the time being. A very lenient superior he proved. My duties consisted in driving round each morning in a car placed entirely at my disposal, and seeing what the men were doing. In the afternoons I played football, and in the evening I prepared to sleep, the most difficult part of my work back here. I tried all the tricks enumerated by Mr. Wordsworth in his famous sonnet on the subject of insomnia, but none of them worked for me any more than for him. So for hours I would lie awake, staring straight into the dark, trying to stave off a repetition of that terrible night. Try as I would, my brain refused to rest. With diabolical reality, it reproduced one by one all the horrors I was trying to forget. Even when, aided by an extra stiff glass of whisky, I fell into fairly sound sleep, it was still busy, and presently it woke me. It woke me with the sound of Western singing ringing inanely in my ears, or the sight of Blackmore's eyes gazing despairingly into mine. At times I would find myself digging for dear life at some hard substance that refused to be moved away by my strenuous efforts, or I would wake gasping for air and calling out that I was choking, and then, realising that it was only my imagination at its old tricks, I would try to be still, while I quivered from head to foot in a perfect Turkish bath of perspiration. Imagination can be tragically active even in retrospect. It was a very limp assistant that confronted Lacey some mornings, but fresh air can be a wonderful panacea. By degrees I slept better. Then they changed us to Vignecourt, 5 miles away, but still back of the line. Here, in the wonderful forests that make the neighbourhood famous, I found some hunting that also helped to chase the shadows. But the work itself, small as it was, proved best of all. It was my first introduction to the mysteries of the airline. Let me introduce you in turn. The airline, or overhead wiring, is used to connect up telephone and telegraph instruments in positions too protected from the advent of the Boches to require any sudden or swift changes. Like the cable section, the airline consists of two detachments, each of which consists in turn of one non-commissioned officer and 10 other men, one man of the 10 being always mounted, usually on a bicycle. Each detachment is subdivided into two main parts. 1. The front party is responsible for the laying out of the line, the making of holes for the poles, the preparing of the poles, and the fixing of the insulators. The other, the rear party, lays out the wire, strains and fixes it to the insulators, and erects the poles themselves. The officer in charge of the section is usually a second lieutenant. His duty officially is to map out the course to be taken, but as he nearly always has two detachments working in different directions at the same time, it is quite impossible for him to act according to the letter of the law. Consequently, this job often goes to the non-com, who is a sergeant. Suppose the line is to be rigged between two villages for a distance of approximately 5 miles. Then number 1, the sergeant, rides on ahead, followed at some distance by the detachment. He picks out the most suitable course to take. When possible, he avoids the main road. Cutting across country, he marks the chosen path by a trail of red flags sticking at intervals out of the earth. This done for a space of a mile or two, he returns to superintend the work of the front party, which has meantime begun, he being responsible not only for the designing but the carrying out of the line. He has to see, for example, that every pole is placed on the highest ground available, that it is not on the road, on a footpath, or even opposite a gap in a hedge where passing traffic would be liable to knock it down. He has to see, in short, that the men don't follow the line of least resistance. Meantime, the front party, consisting of numbers 2, 3, and 4, have set out, accompanied by a motor lorry or horse waggon, 2 of which go to each detachment. On this are piled the necessary stores for the building of the line. Poles for cross-country work are 14 feet high and about 2 inches in diameter. Poles for crossing roads are usually 18 feet, so as to allow for the transit underneath of traffic. Numbers 2 and 3 of the front party carry each a sledgehammer weighing about 14 pounds. Also they have a jumper between them. With this they jump the holes for the poles at intervals of 80 yards. Should a convenient tree come in their path, they fix the insulators on that, so as to save as much of their stock as possible. Number 4, who stays with the waggon, fits the holes with insulators and passes them to the party in the rear. Number 5, who is usually a corporal, superintends the working of this rear party. Number 6 pulls a barrow on which is fitted a drum of wire, and is assisted in his task by Number 7. He, wearing a leather glove, lets the wire run off the drum through his hand, the object being to detect any possible flaws in the cable. These two really form an intermediary party by themselves, coming in the rear of the front and still removed from the second. Numbers 8 and 9 wear belts to which are attached clips. Their duty consists in alternately taking the strain. They fix the clip to the wire. Then, facing towards the rear, they bear back until the wire is as taut as possible. Number 10 comes next. He picks up the pole, fixes the wire which the straining of numbers 8 and 9 has drawn tight, and slips it into the hold which has been jumped by numbers 2 and 3. And so it goes at the rate of 1.5 miles or perhaps 2 miles an hour, each man preparing the way for, or supplementing the work of, the other. As they approach the end of the red flag trail, off starts the sergeant again on his pioneer work of picking up the course. Meantime, however, the men are not left alone. For there is still number 11, he who boasts a bicycle, continually riding up and down the whole line. His job is to keep the crew hard at their work and see that everything, even to the smallest detail, is properly done. Finally, there is the officer, in this case occasionally myself, eternally turning up at the most unexpected moments, flying from one section to another in his swift little car. No, there is no lack of superintendence in this job, and no lack of economy in its conduct. No object lying in the cross-country course of the detachment that is high enough to replace a pole is ever spared. Whether it be a permanent telegraph pole already erected in the country, or a tall tree or a housetop, one and all they come in handy. And woe betide the man who fails to press them into service as supports for his precious wire. Oh, we are terribly economical on the battle fronts of France. This, you know, is a war of materials, and the only one we must waste is human life. My stay at Vignacourt did not last more than a month, so I was soon boosting back to my old place on the line. But it was a very stiff man who reported one evening at a signal office along the Somme. The chances being that my football games were over, I determined to indulge in a regular orgy at the end. In the morning I played soccer with the men. A fine bunch of athletes they were. In the afternoon I took part in a game of rugger between signal and staff officers versus the rest. It was one of those rare spectacles well worth immortalising with a movie camera, though one shrinks from the possible effects it might produce on the mind of the British public. A civilian entering the ranks has forcibly impressed on him at various times the dignity of the High Command, the deference due to exalted station, and the disastrous consequences that follow any familiarity with his superior officers. Consider, then, the feelings of the raw recruit confronted by the spectacle of a general arrayed in amputated pyjamas, ducking and diving, bucking and being bucked around a second-rate football field lined most liberally by cheering Tommies. Togs, of course, are very scarce along the front, and uniforms neither comfortable nor convenient. So when Brigadier General T decided to join us in his night attire, no one expressed the least embarrassment or surprise. As he was 20 years the senior of the eldest of us, we thought, with the contempt of youth, that his presence would not add to our chances. But we were wrong. For neither his language nor his limbs had lost their vigour. There came a stage in the game when we, the signal and staff, were pressing on the "rests" line. The Brigadier was playing scrum half-back. The burly 16 forwards were fighting for supremacy in the scrum. The old man lobbed the ball in. but instead of waiting for his forwards to heel it out, he suddenly vanished in the mass of legs. Then as suddenly out he popped on the other side, and was over the line for a try. We were winning, with 3 minutes to go, and were beginning to feel ourselves safe, when a huge gunner got away down the wing. On he came, like a steam engine shining with sweat, but fresh as a daisy drenched in dew. No one could stop him. We were all about in. Finally there was only me for him to pass. I was playing full back. I had about decided that, if I could manage to bring him down, I could at least drive him into touch, but he must have guessed my intentions from my face. With a sudden swerve he turned away from the touch line to the open field. It proved to be his undoing. There came a cheer from the side lines and a wild shout, "Go it, P.J.'s!" Oh, the demoralising effect of football! It was a private addressing a brigadier general. And there came our little dynamite half back. He was well under 6 feet, streaking up the field like a comet. Now he was on the big gunner who had lost ground in his attempt to swerve. Then, with a yell worthy of an Indian, and a string of parlour words that wouldn't have disgraced a longshoreman, he hurled himself on his huge foe. There followed a couple of fine somersaults. Both bumped the earth. Then, as if made of rubber, up bounced our brigadier and booted the ball down the field into touch for safety, while the gunner lay stiff and windless. There was once a famous Dublin sport writer who declared that, to get an angle on a game, he always sat, not in the press seat, but on the steps of the Mater Hospital, where he could count the casualties from both sides as they come in. His method might have been applied nicely to our game. Swollen lips, swelled foreheads, bruised limbs, broken bones, we had them all. I got only a bloody nose, which insisted, however, on repeating its afternoon performance at intervals as I drove back that evening to my old billet. Though a very tired man, I sat up long to hear the latest. There were many gaps in the old ranks, some in hospital, some "gone west." There were also some promotions and decorations. In connection with the latter, I must tell a story over which I confess we laughed loud and long. Incidentally, it may supply psychologists with a new definition of daring. I'm afraid they have never found one to cover this case. S was a friend of ours, solemn and stately, about as animated as a statue when not compelled to use his muscles. A very careful man, however, with a strict sense of his duties, but absolutely lacking in enthusiasm or inspiration. It happened that, after a very uneventful term in France, he was sent home on leave of absence. He was not gone 2 days, when Venus accomplished what her friend Mars had utterly failed to perform. S came to life with a sudden start, animated by a hopeless and helpless passion. She must have been a charmer to make this stone man melt, but, alas, she was also a gay deceiver. Having raised him for a short period to the highest heavens of joy, she plunged him into the hell of despair. When he returned to the front after this disastrous encounter, he had been transformed from a statue into an untamed tiger. Cold before, he was fiery now. Where he had once been careful, he became reckless. Was there a chance of getting shot? He rushed fearlessly in. He exposed himself in and out of season. Risks were the breath of his life, for all he courted was death. There could be no doubt of it. He wanted to get killed. But did he? Not at all. War never takes the willing. Instead, so unheard of was the fortitude and enterprise he displayed, so it seemed to the uninitiated superiors, that his feats reached the ears of the General. Forthwith he was recommended for a DSO, or Distinguished Service Order. He got it. Strangely enough, it restored his senses. Not that he became a regular statue again, but he took the usual precautions for preserving his life. I would be willing to bet he has lost it since. The gaps I found in the regimental ranks were not the only ones awaiting me on the line. The village, too, was poorer by one inhabitant. A very harmless and helpful creature she had always seemed, ready at any time to take on a man's laundry and turn it out for him almost while he waited. No one had ever thought of connecting her with the mysterious accidents that had sent ammunition dumps and camouflage batteries so often up in smoke. No one thought of it, that is, until it was proved beyond dispute. Unusual aim on the part of the enemy guns always indicates more than average intelligence. There are certain things, of course, which cannot be concealed from the eyes of the aviators, but dumps or dugouts are not reckoned among the number. No man can see things under the earth. Consequently, when Fritz makes an amazingly accurate hit, everyone is on the lookout for suspicious characters. But though the town was very small, none was discovered until an enterprising young airman got on the qui vive. Looking for trouble from aloft, he allowed his eye one day to rest on some bedsheets displayed conspicuously on a lawn. White shows up well against the dark background of the earth. That is why the landing stages are painted that colour, and that is why everyone laughed at this chap, who was not much more than a novice, when he came down with his story about the old lady's laundry. She was quite old, as such people often are. It is most convenient to be able to plead senile deafness or appear doddering when one is asked either pertinent or impertinent questions. But though his suspicions provoked sarcasm, he nevertheless received instructions not to let the said laundry out of his eye. He didn't. And one day he reported those sheets to have assumed the shape of the letter V. The next day they resembled an R. Every day they were there, weather, of course, permitting. An investigation followed, and the boy was proved right. Those sheets were being used as semaphores to point out to enemy airmen positions worthy the attention of their guns. That is why the old lady had vanished from view, and we all had to look elsewhere for a last-minute laundress. End of section 9.